Hello.
And we are live.
Yep, we're here, and we're here with horror author and
Nikki DeKeuster.
yeah, Nikki DeKeuster. It is pronounced
Thank
DeKeuster.
you.
Um, I've been pronouncing it wrong. I pronounced it two different ways, and neither was right. It's
They're all right. It's fine. Mwah.
oh yeah. Well, in this case, it was incorrect.
I've been calling you Nikki because I didn't want to pronounce your name. I was pronouncing it in my head and my heart.
I
Yeah,
got you.
I guess we're on a first name basis now.
Sure. Just
Okay.
Nikki. Hey, you over there.
Yeah, that works too. But we finished your book about what, a week ago, week and a half ago, something like that. And um, we loved just about every second of it. And we can't say that a lot about a lot of books. The great thing about it was, like I've told Becky many times since we read it, it's just the kind of book where we we easily get through it because there was no part of the book that we were like, all right, I wish this would just finish.
Move it on.
You know, there's because most books have those sections, especially books that are 400 plus pages.
hmm
Yeah. So, what
That
you
that
go ahead?
is
Sorry.
a gigantic compliment. Thank you. It can be a challenge to keep the pacing up sometimes. So, and that was always at the forefront of my mind. Hi, David.
So far, two or three people have talked about how cute you are.
Oh,
So
oh.
you're very popular. Let's see. He's
Keep
right.
going. That's fine.
Hey,
Oh,
Mindy.
Mhm. Thank you, David. I
yeah,
will
I
get to the
can't get more,
second.
David.
Yeah, it's we cannot wait for the next Amy story as well. I mean, we are so excited. Any idea when that'll be? I know I'm starting kind of at the end, but
Um, I'm not exactly sure because my schedule is a bit chaotic, but it's going to be a while. I'm not like able to spit these things out every couple of months even
sure.
necessarily. So it'll probably be a good year or so, I
Okay.
would say.
Okay.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Hmm.
So if it's
Um,
sooner, cool. But like I'm not going to be I can't be one of those authors that does like a pre-order. And it's like, all right,
okay.
I have to get it done by this date. And oh no, because life happens,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Um,
So,
Especially when you have a full family, you never know what's going to get thrown at you.
hmm
yeah. Well, life hasn't happened to me a whole lot in a while. I haven't been working for a long time. So, um, um, I don't know. I got 10 years experience and no job, but we'll find something.
It'll happen.
Yeah, it'll happen. But
Hope
yeah,
springs eternal.
we got some people starting to come in. We got well here. I'll let you do that because your finger
It's,
doesn't get in the way.
it just doesn't work right.
Hi, Mindy.
Hi, Mindy.
Mindy's a great booktuber as well.
Hi,
Yeah,
Mindy.
she's fantastic.
So
So it's
so your
cool.
book, is it did you go with a publishing company or did you put it out yourself?
A little bit of both, as is my way to be chaotic. I started my own publishing company.
Oh, you
It,
did.
yep, it's Phoenix Rose Publishing. I have
Okay.
published just my book so far, but I do have an eye towards publishing others at some point in the future when I feel like I have a good grasp on the industry. And I actually chose self-publishing, well, roundaboutly self-publishing, um, because and it was my first choice. You know, you often hear like stories of people who tried to query and failed and then decided to
Yeah.
publish. I looked at all my options and I wanted complete control over my characters, over the story that was being told. I didn't want too many hands getting in there. You know,
Sure.
they'd look at it and be like, this Daniel character has to go. You know what I mean? Like, well, then it's just not the same story. So, And
That's actually really funny.
I'd heard horror stories of authors who, they might have had a plan for a long series and they get 3 books in and their publisher pulls it, because
Yeah.
of the sales not being good enough or whatever, and then they're stuck. They can't write in that universe until either they get the rights back, or they might be able to fight for them back too. But I just
Right.
didn't. I'm a control freak, so I've worked I've worked for myself in various capacities for most of my adult life, and this is no different really. I just looked at it like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. So here I am.
Yeah. There was an interview that Steve Donahue did as well to a lady. She said she her first option and only option was to self-publish. She did not want to go with a publishing company. You're right.
Yep.
You have all control. I totally agree with how that would feel to have total control. It would feel really good. We also know of a man who went with a publishing company. They said, all right, we're going to give you 5 books. And then after the first 2, they said, all right, we want you to have 3 books. You have to wrap it up in the next one. So he gave them like an 1,800-page manuscript, and they have published it. So
Yep.
I can see how that would be a huge pain to have to deal with a publishing company if that's something you don't want to do.
Well, and one of the big reasons, the big draws would be that they do a lot of the marketing for you, right? Because marketing is a bear. It's something I'm currently in the process of learning how to do, as we've talked about, Scott, quite a bit. And it's definitely not a skill that I have. It's one that I have to cultivate. So with that in mind, that's a big draw of traditional publishing. But from stories I've heard, they don't really do all that much for new authors. Like for Stephen King, they might do a big push, but a lot of traditionally published authors end up doing their own marketing anyway. So I'm like, why don't I just keep everything then? Because the profits wise, like if you go with a traditional publisher, you might get maybe, let's say, 10%, to keep it simple, of each sale. Whereas if you self-publish, you can get up to 70% of each sale.
Right. Yeah,
And that's a big difference.
I was thinking about that earlier. I was like, an author, I think, could make more selling a book for $4.99, self-publishing it, than they could selling it for $14.99 from a publisher.
Now, the publishers do have a reach that your average person doesn't have, but you can build. You can build it. It's all possible. Right? It takes work, it takes knowledge and gaining these skills. But that's why, like I said, I have a publishing company, but until I get to a point where I feel like I can do authors who come to me justice, I don't want to open the doors completely yet. You know what I mean? Until I feel I have that good footing. Oh, David asked if that's a Borg cube behind me.
Yeah.
You know it is. I've got a whole fleet.
Nice. Yeah, we are huge Star Trek fans, so we appreciate that as well.
We're among friends.
Yes. My husband is playing the online game, and he named a bunch of his ships after characters in my game to celebrate the launch. So if you were to scroll back through my Facebook group, I have a Facebook storyteller group. You'll see pictures of them. I posted some of them. It's sweet. He's so supportive. Cool. Hi, Sean. Good evening.
I'm sorry. I looked it up.
Yeah, Sean.
He's a great YouTuber as well.
Yeah, Sean's a booktuber as well, and is a damn good one. He one of the more intellectual booktubers, and we love that about him. He's great to watch. So if you ever get a chance, he is great. Or if anybody here is not subscribed, go subscribe to Sean.
You've got the links below. Are you going to put the links below?
Yes.
To everyone participating in Horror Mayhem, because I am all about diving in and finding other booktubers, because it's so great to hear other people's thoughts on these books before you go into them.
Oh yeah.
You can go
Yeah.
to Goodreads and read them, but there's just something, I don't know, sometimes I just like a good video,
Oh yeah,
so.
that's the
Yeah.
bread and butter of BookTube, honestly.
Yeah, we love that we created this, and it's the third event we've created, but it's the first one that has really taken off like this. We keep seeing videos from booktubers. We had no idea who they are. We've never watched any of their videos, but they're participating in this event, so we're learning.
It
So
is.
we're watching them. They're helping us grow. We're going to try to help them grow.
We get excited every time we find one.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with authors. The reason we went with, well, number one, with independent authors, I do not, if there's no way I could get to Stephen King. I tried with Peter Straub. It's just never going to happen because I have to go through somebody else. When I want to talk to an author, I want to talk to an author. I don't want to talk to his agent.
Yeah, that's one thing that's nice too, is being able to interact directly with the fans. I mean, any author really can do it. I see Chris Carter a lot. I don't know if you've read any of his thrillers.
I haven't.
I see him pop on, and he's pretty up there. He's prolific and whatnot. If you have not read some of his Robert Hunter series, they're crime thrillers, and he really does an excellent job. Can't recommend him enough.
That sounds like your cup of tea.
Yeah, it does. That is definitely my cup of tea.
They're very well written and researched and
Okay.
bizarre in all good ways. I think.
I like bizarre.
So, all right. So you can you tell us a little about your book? And someone who hasn't read it.
It's sort of an abbreviated.
Yeah, so sort of an abbreviated. Your books, the 2 books you have published.
Oh, a abbreviated version. Okay. Well, I've got Bittersweet Empathy, The Spiral, which is about 450 pages, and it's like a psychological thriller / cosmic horror / supernatural. We were talking about where does this fit? It's got a little bit of everything. There's some a steam factor in here, but it's all centering around a girl who suddenly is struck with the ability to feel other people's emotions. And she starts off more apathetic. No, it's not the X-Files Chris Carter, I don't believe. Don't quote me on that. I don't know everything he's done. But I don't think that's the same one. Just look up the Robert Hunter series and you'll find him. He's got like a ton of stuff. So, all right, Chris Carter, stop interrupting my shout out to him. So she gets suddenly struck with the ability to feel people's emotions, and she's out ghost hunting. So that's kind of where it starts off, with this ghost hunting vibe with her best friend in this creepy old barn in Maine. And then like she goes back to her best friend's house, sleeps it off, wakes up, feels okay, goes to school, and then it creeps back. And so it's this her trying to feel or figure out, is this something that happened to me there? Because they've been ghost hunting forever and nothing's happened. Like they just kind of scare each other, and they're teenage girls and they have fun. And so it's her and her best friend trying to figure out what's actually going on with this. And eventually she gets the ability to control emotions and has a fair bit of mischief and fun, but it's horror. So most of the stuff will come back to bite her somehow. It's that sort of feeling. Not that she doesn't ever have her wins, but yeah, so that's kind of the spoiler-free version. She runs into a boy who she can't feel, and kind of he becomes wrapped up in this mystery, and it goes in directions that you wouldn't necessarily think that it's going to go. I'll say that. At least that's been something that's been levied at me, and I would agree with. Like I try to always twist and turn and twist and turn,
Yeah.
So, and then Red String is a sort of connected novelette. It's about 10,000 words. Um, and this is more fast paced. So whereas this I would describe as more slow burn,
Mhm.
although it does have its action in it. It's not like
Yeah.
nothing's happening either, but it's more like a build up, character driven. You get to know them. This I throw you right into the deep end, right? And it's just high octane chaos as
Yeah.
these two characters try to escape notice from some unnamed organization or organizations. Um, and starts out at a carnival where things go a little wrong. One of the rides,
Just
one
a
of
little bit.
yeah, one of the rides bursts, and I can't ever go to carnivals again because I researched
Oh gosh.
a little too well, and I'm like, well, no, I can't go, but like I eye those rides now. I'm like, I know it's keeping you together, but the main character ends up getting involved trying to help people from this accident, and then you get seen basically, and the cover is blown, and they have to go on the run again. So they're it starts out on the run, and they think they kind of gotten away, and then it's like crap, ugh, and it's just complete chaos. So this I would say is more thriller, but
Yeah.
there's horror elements to
Mhm.
it too.
Yeah.
They can be read in
Taint. I mean, I think that's just fine. But here's the e-copy, the e-version that I got on Amazon, and it's we would highly recommend it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it goes in
Just-
directions you wouldn't necessarily think they'd go. Understatement of 2022 so far. I am telling the future. Yes. So now I can't actually see unless you put them up on the screen. I can't see like a chat on mine.
Yeah,
Should I be able
it
to?
only does that. No, it only does that for the host
you
for
guys,
some
okay.
reason. Yeah,
Just
it's,
checking to make sure I didn't have to click something I didn't see or whatever.
No,
that don't seem right.
I don't think so. I don't think there's anything you can do. But do you have some questions there that you would like to?
Yes,
throw
we
out?
have some questions for you as an author and guest, and so the first one I wanted to ask, and we sort of know know now, but for the people watching, who are your influences, and who do you read?
Oh, let's see. Well, we talked at the beginning a little beforehand about Vampire the Masquerade. So I
Yeah.
gotta give a huge shout out to White Wolf and everything they produce. Okay. Something that isn't talked about, I think, too much in the horror community, but I'm a huge role player, have been for many years, storyteller, and just the ambiance that those books create and the world that they put you in really influenced me and my decision to, because this is a first, Amy's story is, or the bittersweet empathy spiral, which is the main character is Amy, I should say, is first person, really deep point of view, and that's influenced by all of the role playing, right? Like get down into character. It's a character driven story. You are with her in these moments, feeling these emotions, going through it for good and for ill, and it's a roller coaster. Like it does have some gory moments, but it's not super gore focused.
Mhm.
But I would say it's also got like kind of a dread that builds. And that's an influence that when you're running games or just even playing in them, you create that atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
impending dread. And when you're a character and the GM or the game master is, putting you in these situations and whatever, you never know what's going to happen next. Like they might not even know. Could just pop up.
RPGs are more fun when you're afraid for your life.
Yeah, exactly. Or as we discussed, there are things that are worse than death, right? There are
Mhm.
things you can do to characters that are worse than death. I would argue that by the end of this book, what I have done to the main character is worse than death.
Yeah.
By far, personally. And we can get into that in the spoilery discussion, but
Yeah. For those watching, there will be a little bit of a spoilery section towards the end. We'll give you plenty of warning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of people actually have questions for you, and we'll say, well, if it would do, okay. So Sean Stanfast said, Nikki, do you have an outside editor for your final manuscript, and how does that work within self-publishing?
I do. I have both of these were professionally edited. Um, and I so grammar isn't necessarily my strongest suit. I've gotten better, but I tend to I don't really care about that stuff too much when I'm reading. I gloss over it and it doesn't bother me, but I know that it really bothers some people. So it was important to me to make sure that that was edited. And then I happen to have a friend who is a professional developmental editor who mentored me, and now I do professional developmental editing also. But I was fortunate to have her take a look at it before, and we kind of do each other's work, right?
Okay.
So I have had a professional developmental editor and professional copy editor and proofreader on all of them. So that is something that I'm fortunate that I'm able to do, but not every author has the funds to do it, right?
Right.
So it
Yeah.
can be a bit of a catch-22 problem in self-publishing because you want to get your story out there and you're really excited for it. But you also have to think about the reader experience. Like there's a contract that happens here, I think. At least that's how I look at it. Now, would I rather some stories be out there and maybe they're not perfect? Maybe they get cleaned up after the book makes some money. I think that's okay too. But I think you need to go in and let the people know beforehand what to
Yes.
expect. Be like,
Yeah.
hey, I didn't have the funds to edit this. I'm sorry. And then people that don't care won't care, right? But
Sure.
people that do can steer clear. So I think that could be a happy medium instead of just people blasting into it and being like, "Oh my god," And anything to me, anything that kicks somebody out of the story is bad.
Yes.
Hmm.
Very much so.
So
And like we were talking about Stephen King earlier, like I say, he's written some stuff I really can't get behind, and that is one of the main reasons. Stephen King has written a lot of things into his stories that just knock me out of the story completely. Whether it be 100 pages of almost description, I mean, The Stand, I really don't like The Stand at all. I know I understand why people do, but I think there is so much of that in there and so many superfluous characters that I don't think he is as successful a writer as he is a selling author.
but I think one thing that Stephen King does and why he is so successful is because he makes you feel like he's telling you the story. Right. And he, especially with his short stories, I've noticed he is so good at immediately making his characters feel like real people.
Yeah.
And that really goes a long way. So,
Yeah.
I do understand The Stand is a door stopper, right?
Hmm.
I should say King wasn't somebody that I had read much before I started writing.
Hmm.
Oddly, I was in one of those weird camps where I just hadn't really read him. And I think his made for TV movies and stuff kind of had turned me off. But I since have grown to really love him. Um, but I do see the criticisms for sure. That's absolutely fair. And then
Yeah.
in terms of It's and Tommyknockers, which are also big, thick books, um, in them, the rambling really has it's almost the point. It's to get to know the town, and the town itself is a breathing, living entity.
Yeah.
So I think some people might not see it that way,
Well, see,
right?
I love it, but The Stand,
But
I
The
just
Stand
didn't, I
and The
just
Stand
didn't get
does
there.
go like this, and that's another one where I did not like the ending. I
Yeah.
didn't.
Oh, it was terrible. It was bad. But
But I love the characters and, and I cried at certain points,
yeah.
he still got that out of me, and it's a memorable story, so
Yeah, well, see, I think in a lot of even Charles Dickens stuff, his stories can get boring at times, but in a way, it's earned. Because of what the rest of the story is, because of how well it's told. Whereas with some of Stephen King stuff in The Stand and things like that, I think it gets boring for no good reason. And most of the
Well,
time,
not no good
most,
reason.
yeah,
Well, speaking,
There is a bit of that.
I'm like actively mad at Stephen King, so I'm trying not to jump in too much. He made me read the entirety of The Dark Tower with my own eyeballs.
I didn't make her.
Stephen
King.
No, Stephen
That
King
was
did.
actually the first. The Dark Tower series was my first introduction to him. Well, outside, I read a little bit of The Green Mile at one point, but The Dark Tower was the first one that I finished. So it's weird, and it's an interesting way to come into King.
Yeah.
my husband tends to be like, "Here, read this. I think you'll like it." And I'm like, "Okay." So, and Stephen King, Jim Butcher is also an influence.
Becky loves Jim Butcher.
Like the Dresden Files, Anne Rice. I gotta give her a shout out too. Like 14-year-old me sucking down Interview with a Vampire.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is your writing process? Do you maintain a schedule, or do you write only when the inspiration strikes you? A little of both. I endeavor to have a schedule, and then usually chaos happens. I personally have a few health issues. I have some autoimmune issues that flare up from time to time, and if I'm in a flare, it's hard to concentrate, especially if it hits my brain.
Yeah.
So I've learned to be really gentle with myself. And so that's why I say I kind of have a schedule and kind of not. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I totally get it. I have an autoimmune issue. I have severe psoriasis. And when it flares up, nothing's happening. Just leave me alone in my dark corner and I'll just be miserable by myself.
Well, yeah, you get it then. Like sometimes it just flares, and then I've got my tools that can help keep those flares down or whatever. But so, yeah, I tend to I do try to write a little bit every day, like that sort of thing. But I'm not strict about it. And also, like, I tend to edit as I go.
Right.
So, like, I got quite a bit of ways into book 2, and I actually ended up scrapping a whole bunch of it and had to go back. And I was like, crap, it just didn't work. And I had edited up until that point. So there's definite dangers. It'll be better for this, I think, I hope. But it's a messy process is the point. It can be really messy. So David Green says, we've already talked about that scene, and I am still completely in awe of it. Do you have anything comparable cooking up in your mind for book 2? And please teach me your ways. Come, young Jedi. So David Green is the person who interviewed me, Scott, that you saw before.
Yes.
So I'd like to give a shout out to his channel. He's got the Worlds of David Green.
Yes.
And he interviews authors there too, and does some Wheel of Time stuff. So he's a little bit more on the fantasy end, but actually, I thought he might come up. So I'm going to plug his book. He's got an urban fantasy called this one is The Devil Walks in Blood, and it's about a guy who dies and realizes that he comes back to life and realizes that we're all actually in hell.
Wow, cool. Okay.
So and he's like a detective, so it's like a film noir kind of vibe to it. And I don't know, there's something about this character that I just absolutely love. So I always plug in this book. And David has a very smooth, fluid writing style. So
okay. Can somebody leave a comment when this is over, or just send it to us and we will plug that under our video?
Okay, I can do that.
Okay.
But you want to know if I have anything comparable to that scene cooking up? Oh, well, you're gonna have to be a little bit more specific. scene.
That scene. I'm
That
dying to know
scene.
what that scene
I
is.
think he's talking about the scene where, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler because I have in, and maybe we should have actually read the back of the book blurb, but um, it talks about the pressure of keeping everyone's emotions at bay is cracking my jury-rigged mental wall into a Cheshire grin. The question is, whose grin is it? Mine, yours, or something curiously sinister? As reality twists into a labyrinthian spiral, each step I take brings a little more tragedy and a little less me. I'll have to double back on my fading footprints and find what passes for the truth before my sixth sense becomes my only sense. So I think he's talking about when her sixth sense becomes her only sense, right? So I don't think that's too much of a spoiler, but she goes through a synesthetic
Yeah.
trip.
I remember that.
That
vividly.
scene really surprised me.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a good way. Yeah, because it was somehow effective, and you kind of felt what she was feeling in some small way.
Yeah,
And
that one was it was a challenge to write. It took me like the better part of 6 months to
right.
get that down. Like I'd write it, tear it up, try again, put it to my poor alpha reader Jennifer and be like, "Does this make sense?" And she'd be like, "Yeah." You know, and then I'd give it to other people and they'd be like, "Oh, okay, well maybe tweak this or whatever." And so it takes a village to write a novel is what I really think.
Sure.
Well, there's a magical scene that I want to talk about when we get to the spoilery section. It killed me. Let's see. Candace, he would lose.
Becky versus Stephen King. Well, Stephen King can turn us into Choco Tacos at will, so I think we're all pretty much hosed there.
Right. I need to move to King Country just for that.
I mean, one thing well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Nikki, have you watched the Brandon Sanderson videos on
his process?
On his process?
I was going to say GIS process. I don't know what that is. On his, I have watched Brandon Sanderson. He has some very, very solid advice, I think. And that's one thing too, that like how I decided to get into this writing journey. I've got about 20 years role-playing experience and storyteller, game master, dungeon master, whatever you want to call it, experience. But writing a book is a different thing, right? Writing a book, you have to have a solid ending. Right, Becky? Yeah.
You actually have to know how to end a novel.
So that's, I guess, where I kind of sympathize with Stephen King too, because in role playing, it's always open ended.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like you could always come back to the game, and oftentimes they'll just kind of stop, and people get bored and pick up another game, and it's a very chaotic situation. So
yeah, I'm the
there's
first to argue.
techniques.
It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult. It really is.
So when I first started writing, I was also learning the craft of writing and story structure and all of this stuff and just diving absolutely into it. And it helped me get through some of my illness too, by the way, just to give that focus on something like I'm going to do this and only I can do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody else in the world that can tell Amy's story like I can. My husband could tell it because he knows enough of it at this point from brainstorming, but it would be very different. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers that question sufficiently, but
well, it actually answers this one too.
Yep.
Since you talked about the tabletop role playing.
Oh yeah, lots of inspiration. The character of Amy in this is actually a character that I played in a game called Silver Age Sentinels, which I highly recommend. It's an over-the-top, campy comic book superhero game. Okay, unapologetically the Silver Age of comics. Now you, as the players, as the game master, can make it whatever you want it to be. You can take that, I guess, bones of the system and set it in the world of darkness, right? Or whatever. So I would say that I took heavy inspiration from there in terms of what abilities Amy has. But it is very different. It is not comic book either. No flying superheroes. Like it's I've made it my own. I'll say, but I do have heavy influences from the World of Darkness, from the Call of Cthulhu games, right? The cosmic horror. So a lot of the skipping through Amy's mental states because she starts to lose her mind through the book and she takes you with her
Yeah.
very slowly. She's not a reliable narrator as the story
Right.
goes on. Like that's one thing too that I really strove to do is make sure that I'm rewarding readers that are paying attention. So like
Yeah.
a character will say one thing to Amy in the dialogue and she will interpret it another way. And so it's sort of up to you as the reader to catch that or just go with Amy's version. And that's
Yeah.
okay too, right?
Yeah.
I've had people say that they got done and read it again and it becomes almost a different book when
Right.
when you kind of know what's going on to the end. And I personally love that and I strove to do that like whenever possible. So yeah, those are kind of my big influences. I'm sure I'm leaving out a game or
I'm
two.
I am
But
glad you said that though about um, the reader being responsible kind of for what they get out of the reading. And I totally agree with that. I loved and I thought many times during this book that you know what, she's not holding my hand through this book.
no, yeah.
And I love that about a book. I love a book that makes me pay attention.
One of the reasons you don't see that as much is because the traditional publishing world cuts that like a knife. Like it's one of the things that I didn't like.
Yes, they do.
They want it to be easily grasped, easily understood, so it gets to the most amount of people. You know what I mean?
It
Like,
has to be wrapped up in a pretty bow.
yeah, it has to be um, easily. What's that word? Like when?
Accessible.
Yeah, I guess
Or
um,
digested. Yeah.
digested. Yeah, so like oftentimes one of the things that drives me nuts in books is when they over explain, right?
Hmm.
When you're like, yeah, I know you just said, but that's why they do it. So I try to give the author a little bit more slack when I come across it because I know why it's in there. And I did do that here or there. Like if something was unclear to enough of my beta readers, which are the early readers, I would have Amy kind of spell it out. Because sometimes you do. Like there's the whole show versus tell in writing, right? Do I show the person what the character is going through and have them interpret it, or do I just tell them? And
Right.
both are needed. Like you can't have too
Hmm.
much, right?
What
And that was
what no-
actually
what
something.
nobody,
What's that?
what nobody heard was Scott's little heart going pitter patter with joy. Uh, he talks about that all the time. How he hates it when authors wrap everything up in a nice, pretty, neat little bow.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and we're talking everything. And I hate it on television. I hate it in movies too, but I especially hate it in books. Treat
Well,
your audience as though they have an intellect.
yeah. And there's possible different interpretations to.
Yes.
I love gray characters, so that's what you're gonna get in my world. They're
Yeah.
all shades
100%.
of gray, right? There's
Yeah.
some that are darker shades of gray and some that are lighter shades of gray. But like I would argue that Kayla, who is probably one of the lightest characters in this, the most good, you
Yep.
know, um, she's breaking into a barn when we meet her. That's breaking and entering. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? She's not exactly a saint either. So I love that. I love that many dimensional
Yeah.
characters.
You made Becky cry with Kayla.
Yeah,
We're not gonna spoil it yet, but
that's
you
one of my questions.
It is a touching relationship.
It really
Kayla
is.
Kayla was somebody who wasn't originally supposed to be in the story for as long as she was. So in my outline, she like when Amy first starts really going crazy, she leaves her. Like they break off their friendship. And when I actually started really writing Kayla, she looked at me and she was like, I got done with I think that first chapter, and she was like, I'm not going anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like the way
Yeah.
you've written me, I'm sorry, but I'm not.
Yeah, it would have
There's
been true to her
no way.
character.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been true to her. And that's something that my role playing background has really given me, hammered in over the years. You have to stay true to the characters. No matter
Yeah.
where the story goes, you cannot just say, well, the plot needs you to do this and you better do it. You better find a reason why that character is doing what they're doing. Or the whole story will break, right? And you guys know this. You read a lot. How many times do you come across things that just whips you out of the story because it's just completely unbelievable that the character is built up to there would do that. And so I was like, okay, Kayla, let's do this. And, she became a fan favorite character. I love her, so I think the story is so much stronger. She's been worked into the series, and I keep the door open all the time for that. The character
Good.
of Leilani is the same way. Like,
Okay.
she was not supposed to be in it for more than a cameo,
A couple of pages.
basically,
Right.
a little
Right.
bit. And then, as I understood story and a satisfying ending, I was like,
It thoroughly was, yeah.
I need to not, like, I can't just put her off for a later book. You know what I mean? So she was always meant to be there bigger in the story, but so her role changed a lot. And that was actually one of my friend Allison's questions that she posed to me on Facebook. She can't be here right now because it's 1 a.m. in England.
Oh,
Although David was here, so he's sure up, and he's in
yeah,
Ireland.
Sean's in England.
So we got some night owls, but she is not.
Yep.
And she wanted to know, had I ever changed my plans for the series based on people's reactions? And I guess that sort of answers that, yeah, like Leilani has become it's part of what I scrapped when I was working on book 2. I was like, I have to put her in here more.
And
Okay.
she was a
Than she
fascinating character.
than she is right now. I had a plan for her, and then she was going to be off doing something else, and I'm like, nope, come here, front and center, lady. So now I've had to rework the story, and there's still elements that will always be there. There's the main points, but how I get there is now different. I changed cars.
Well, that's actually a great segue. Candace asked this question. I actually have it written on my tablet. Do you plot your stories in like detail and meticulously, or do you sort of fly by the seat of your pants and let your characters guide you?
Mostly, okay. So I do an outline just to make sure that I have the main points and that I'm telling a coherent narrative, that it's hitting kind of all the beats that are satisfying for a reader. And then from there, I always give the characters leeway. Like as I'm writing, it's happened many a time. Just like I said with Kayla, there was a scene with Daniel towards the end where like I needed him to do something specific, and we can talk about it in the spoilers if you want, but he balked and was just not doing it and not doing it. It wasn't coming out, and I was like, and I talked to the characters, and I'm kind of like, okay, well, what's up? What do you need? And I ended up just moving on from that, and I was like, well, let's move on. We'll do the next scene. And it was a scene in the back of Kayla's truck at the end. So I did that. And then lo and behold, at the end of that, he was like, well, will this work? to get that point across, if you get me. And so that's where the story went, right? And so it is very different. And we can talk in the spoilers about what I was going to do versus what ended up happening if you want.
Okay.
But I think it's really important because these characters have lives of their own. And that's one thing that I strove to do too, to make them feel like when the characters aren't in front of Amy, they're still living a life. Right? So I'm always like, okay, the mother isn't here. Where is she and what's she been doing since we saw her last?
Okay.
Right. And how is that going to color, even if Amy never knows what she was off doing? How is that going to color how she interacts with her now? You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's again from my role playing roots. Like as a game master, you have to always be thinking of that too and on the fly, right? Okay, they now suddenly the player characters want to go run over here and talk to this character, and I don't have anything planned for them. They were not in tonight's notes whatsoever, but I'm not going to put a bus in front of the characters and be like, no, you can't go. You know, it's like, okay,
Right.
well, what is going on? Let's explore together. But in that case, unless it's being recorded, you know, there's no like, it's all good. It's just whatever happens, you laugh, and some works and some doesn't. It's like throwing paint at the wall. You know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas, and that's kind of what a first draft is, really. So one thing that writing these 2 books now has taught me is to try to pull back the reins on my perfectionist streak. Really.
Yeah.
So
All right. So we'll do this one question from Sean, and then after that we can go into the spoiler territory if you want.
okay. So can
Yeah.
I read it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Or Becky can. Yeah, either one.
Okay.
Okay. Is the pacing of the book different, being inspired so much from gaming rather than if from mostly printed influences? I've seen this from film inspired writing, so wonder if it's the same from gaming. Phew. I'm not exactly sure. That's a really good question. Um, I do tend to see each scene like as because in gaming you do that too. You're like, can I get a scene? You know, and the GM will say, here's what's happening in this area that you are, and usually something goes down there, and then you go to another scene. So I do tend to look at it like, okay, we're in a scene for these couple of chapters rather than by chapter. And I
Right.
don't know if that influences it for the better or the worse or, you know, whatever. But I also, you know, had been reading quite a bit as wrote too. So there's definite book influences in there too. And like I said, they're 2 different animals. Um, Knowing how to tell a story around a campfire is not the same, or orally is not the same as writing a coherent book that all has to come together. And you say you hate it when it all wraps together in a bow, but um, there's a reason a lot of places do that to try to make it all satisfying. Now, in my case, I'm doing a series, so I can do stuff like leave things open for you, right?
Right.
And in role playing, the game master or the characters might open up a thread that never gets followed, and it's just hanging there. And that stuff is fine in a game. Or it could be like 3 years later and they finally follow up on that thread if it's a long running game. But in a book that's a little harder to do because people are like, but you know, this happened and you never had any sort of sense of closure, even if it isn't like completely wrapped up. Like there's stuff at the end of book 1 that you don't know. There's still mystery. There's
Mhm.
big mystery at the end. I don't answer everything.
Right.
It's a planned 9 book series at this point. So I've got a big arc that Amy's going through.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. What bothers me is not so much when it's, you know, when at the end of the story it's all wrapped up and neat. It's it's when it's done in a way that talks down to the audience. That's what that's what bothers me about that. And Sean, I will tell you from a reader's perspective, it's not like reading a Dungeons and Dragons book. It's the pacing isn't like that at all. It's because I've read lots of Dungeons and Dragons books, and they're obviously Dungeons and Dragons books. Now, you can say, this is inspired by your gaming experiences, but it is not an obvious tabletop role playing game that you're reading at
no,
all.
no. And the way that I run games when I do run them is, like I said, it's like I let the players do something if it's cool, you know. that sort of thing. So I let them get away with a lot. I let Amy get away with a lot to a point. But if there's something that they've done that's gone overboard, like it's not like you can just walk up to the king and slap them and get away with it. You know what I mean? There will be consequences. And so that's what you see in this. It's not like flitting through and just, here's a fight and then we go on to the next thing. Here's a fight and then we go on to the next thing. If anything, it's a bit more like the games of personal horror, the Vampire the Masquerade and White Wolf line in that way. Not that there's not any action. I had to learn how to write fight scenes, right? And in a satisfying way, or what I hope is satisfying. So, and that's something about this too. Like I really, really put my heart and soul into, I was like, if I'm going to do this and put it out there for people for the rest of time, I was like, I really want to make sure that I do it as well as I possibly can. Nothing can ever be perfect, but I really like each step of the way was like, okay, I have to write a fight scene. I'm going to go learn what do people say. All right, use punchy, quick, short sentences. You know what I mean? And I'm like, that makes sense. That gets you down and into the action, right? So stuff like that was fun. It was really fun to learn too. I like learning new things. What I missed, David had a thing on the screen and you took it off and I didn't get to finish reading it. So the direction the ending goes is unexpected, but also satisfying at the same time. Ties everything together well, and it isn't a happy butterflies and candy ending. No. I mean, it is horror. It's horror, and that's why I chose that genre. Like at the end of the day, because in horror, you don't have to wrap it all up. It doesn't have to be sunshine and roses, right? It can be. Stephen King will often try to wrap his up in a nice bow at the end and make it a happy ending. But it doesn't have to be. And horror readers, I think, tend to be more open to that, right? So that they don't feel it's an unsatisfying ending as long as things are addressed, right?
Right.
And so
Amy and Daniel have a big, scary future in front of them at the end of the book. They have a very
Are we getting into spoiler territory?
Well, no, I'm trying to do it with it. It's very uncertain.
your audio is kind of cracking up. I can still hear you, but you're robotic. Just so you know, I don't know if there's anything that can be done about that.
It does it so often. Let's try this.
Now you're sounding a little bit better, so it might have just been a...
Okay, well, we'll see what happens.
That's better. You're still a little bit far away sounding, but...
Okay. Yeah, so I guess we're going to head into spoilery territory.
Yeah, I think everybody's left that doesn't want to hear the spoilers. So we're going to head into territory of spoilers. Can you hear us now?
Yeah, you're still a bit crunchy. But I can hear you. I can hear you. I can understand you. But just the audio quality it's rural Georgia, so.
Yeah, it happens on every one of these at least once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll probably come back in a little bit. It'll take some time.
Okay, so this is from Amanda, who is somebody who I've run games for in the past. And she says, Nikki is a wild, chaotic GM. We've spent good chunks of sessions on a character's obsession with a wall. Or an NPC's raging case of crabs. Yeah, and I guess that brings up a good point, Amanda. So it's horror, and there are horrifying things, but it's also fun. Like, this is a coming of age, a bunch of hoodlums having fun, being hoodlumy. It's something that I didn't really see too much of out there, and you can let me know, Scott and Becky, you've read a lot. But just books from the hoodlum's point of view, right? Or I guess the villain's point of view is something that's done a little bit more often, but just like a character that isn't Snow White, that isn't like, I'm so innocent and all this stuff is happening to me,
You you actually see it a lot more, at least in my perspective, you see it a lot more from people who publish themselves.
It's like they're afraid to have bad things happen to the character. Have you seen that? Yeah.
Well,
I'm not afraid.
I'm talking about people putting characters out there that are not Snow White. That
Oh,
they're all
okay.
shades of gray. You're seeing
Okay.
it a lot more, especially
A
in
lot more.
romances.
Well, you see it in fantasy. You see it in high fantasy, like epic fantasy. Like, that's what they call grimdark.
Its time has come. Its time has come.
Yeah, but you don't see it very much in other genres, and I think it's sad because it can be done well, and you did it well.
I think a lot of publishing has.
Well, yeah, because you have to make them relatable and somebody that the audience roots for. So you gotta, there's that saying of save the cat. I don't know if you've heard that before, but it's like you got to make sure that they do something nice at the beginning somewhere in the story so that you're endeared to them. Now, as the protagonist of the story, people are more inclined to like them to begin with, so they get a little leeway. But you start off with Amy, and one of the first things you learn is she's there and she's loyal to her best friend. Right? She's there because she needs her there, even if she's not sure she believes in any of this crap, and she might want to be doing other things. It doesn't matter. She's there and she's full in. And I think that makes a little bit of a difference in, going forward. And then it also matters too when you get the antagonist, so like you're naturally inclined to take Amy's point of view and Amy's side versus her mother, right? So
yeah, the way I know the way a lot of right, the way a lot of romance around that is through the love.
No, there's no crabs in this story that I know of. Well, no, let's just say, okay, so Daniel is speaking up and he would like it to be known that Trevor has a raging case of crabs.
Of course.
So Trevor is Daniel's the main love interest, and his best friend gets poked fun at a lot, or one of his friends, I should say.
Because he's such a dweeb.
He is, I know. Like, of all the characters, that's something everybody can agree on. Trevor's annoying. He's made to be annoying. He serves his purpose.
Okay. So for those watching now and future, here there be spoilers. So look away if it's going to bother you. But there's one question that's been burning in me since the first time I picked up the book, and it's about the smoking. I want to know what your thought processes were in giving her that really really heavy duty crutch of smoking.
Well, so when you're building a character in a role-playing setting, you get points. And I got a point for giving her addiction. So I had to figure out what she was addicted to in that game. Okay. Now to carry it over when I was I'm writing the book, what is this going to serve? Like, how can I do this, in a way that makes sense for the story? And so then I was like, okay, we'll have her pick it up. And I used to smoke many, many years ago. And so I know that one of the benefits of it and why you do it is it relaxes you. And so I kind of took that to the nth degree with her. She found something that is able to relax her enough that she takes the edge off without muddling her brain even more, right?
You can go with drinking or drugs or anything like that.
Yeah, she tried those things. I did a little, I don't dwell on it long, but I have a little paragraph where I talk about what her and Kayla tried, and they figured out there's something specifically about cigarettes. And what that is, in part, is also there's a breath work that happens. Now you're taking in poisons, but you're still doing a deep breath and getting an oxygen that a lot of people don't get. They'll sit like this, and be all small and take short, quick breaths,
Yeah.
you know. So if you're a smoker and you're laid back and you're feeling a little bit more relaxed and you're taking in a full lung of smoke and air at the same time, it also relaxes you. Like, it opens up the mind,
Isn't
and
that true?
one of the ways that I get into her character sometimes if I'm having trouble is I'll sit there like this and I'll be like, all right, and let's get back into Amy and just holding that cigarette. Um, for a long time, I had an empty pack or almost empty pack of Newports. I had a single cigarette in it. I came across somebody that had some, and I was like, "Hey, can I have that last one?" And I used it as a prop in the game. So I'd sit there with this cigarette in my mouth, and that was Amy. And that's how you knew I was in character. So yeah, the cigarette was thought through as opposed to
We figured
smoking
it
a
was.
joint or yeah.
Yeah, we
Well, I
figured it
figured it had to be really deliberate because all three of the main characters are extremely smart.
Hmm.
Extremely smart. They understand. They would understand the teachers. I wondered why, how deliberate it was.
Well, and if you'll notice too, since we're in spoiler territories, um, what happens? So Daniel tries to get her to quit,
Mhm.
right? There's that scene where he's like, you look a lot sexier without this, whatever. And she refuses because she knows what it's doing, like that it's helping hold her together. And she's like, nope. And by that point, she's not quite as far gone as she gets to be in terms of being like crazy for him specifically. So we get to see pre, um, I don't know what the correct word is for it, but that catalyst point, you know, um, where she kind of ties herself to him more. So previous to that, we see her actually doing damage to him because she gets him to start smoking. And so whereas their dynamic eventually becomes he has a lot of control over her by the end of the story, she got one in. You know what I mean? He's still addicted to cigarettes now. And so that's kind of also one of the things that will be prolific throughout the series. I'll be dealing with these themes of being submissive, but also still having agency.
right.
Yeah,
I believe you can do both.
Yeah, I noticed that they actually played a big role in what's the second book that we read, The String.
Red
Right.
String? Yeah, you see it a lot more in that one, how dependent she becomes on him, right?
Yeah.
And it's very much stark, and you're like, I had one reader who had read the first book and then read Red String, and she put a little note in the column because she was doing a final read through for me. And she was like, "Oh no." She was like, "Amy, what happened to you?" You know? You gotta read the next book. So there is a draw there, right? Like, what happened between these books? Well, you can see it starting at the end of this one,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I noticed Daniel was quite a bit more savage in
Mhm.
the second story.
Yeah, he had to be.
Yeah.
It had to be.
Yeah.
He had to be.
But again, we're not sure what caused that because we don't have the next 2.5 books.
Yeah. So there's a missing component here, and it ends also with Amy not being sure what she's done, right? She's not sure how much of what's going on with her is somehow influencing him.
Right.
And she also doesn't care. And to me, there's a lot of different horror aspects in this game
Yeah.
or in this series in this book. But one of the most horrific is that realization that she's just utterly tied herself to this, for whatever reason, very toxic, bad situation, right? And how many of us can relate to that at the end of the day when you fall in love with somebody Now I use supernatural components and other things to up the ante, right?
Right.
But you fall in love with somebody and then maybe you start to find out other parts of them a little too late, right?
Yeah.
And so part of what I wanted to do with this story is take you on that journey that, you know, I mean, it is a complex relationship, but there are definite like controlling, abusive tones to it, right? And so often I'll see, I don't know if you guys have read Rose Mater by Stephen King.
Yes.
So you'll see a character like is in there, like I think his name is Norm Daniels, who is very black and white. Like he's very abusive and obviously beating her until she's almost dead and like over the top and like no redeeming qualities. But in reality, people know like relationships don't start out like that. Like King touches on it a little bit in that to his credit, but oftentimes you just see, well, he's bad, you should leave him. End of story, right? Or she's crazy, what are you doing there? When there's history, there's nuance, you know?
Right.
And so that's kind of also what I wanted to show with this story to a degree is how somebody finds themselves in such a situation. Now, again, I use supernatural elements, right?
Right.
And have fun with that. But the base elements are all there. Like it starts out fun. Doesn't start out with him. In fact, he doesn't traditionally abuse her. There's no smacking her across the room, right? There's none of that. And so it is this weird area of, and I don't want to get too far into it because we'll get into the next books, and that's a little spoiler too far. But you know, like I said, it ends with Amy wondering how much she has done these things and how much is him. And that
Yeah.
is a theme that will be continuing and still does in Red String, right? She still looks at it, like you said, he has to do these things. And so she'll, in Red String, she literally will look away and try to justify it any way that she can. And, you know, I'm sure we all know people like this in our lives that will just gloss over the most obvious things for love, whether that's a love of a significant other or, you know, love of a child or whatever. So I wanted to play with that. So
One of the things I really like about that aspect also is you let the audience make up their mind as to how they feel about the relationship. You don't tell them, hey, this is wrong. You know, what's going on here is wrong and you're supposed to hate Daniel and all this stuff, or you're supposed to hate Amy. People can make up their own minds. And there are so many books that shouldn't do it, that preach to their audiences about what is right and what is wrong and all this stuff. But your audience is allowed to make up their mind as to how they feel about that relationship. And I like that aspect of it a lot.
yeah, thank you. I did. I tried to make it well, and Amy will never frame it that way, really. Like there's a couple times when I give her some clarity that she does understand, or she, you know, she's writing this in the future. So she has her future ability to focus on what it is. But yeah, it was important to me not to like spell it out too ham-fisted.
Yeah.
I guess. I will say that when you guys are a little closer, I can hear you a little bit better. Yeah. I've noticed that.
Okay. So you want to go with the question?
Well, I don't really have these. Most of these have actually been addressed, but I would like to know where you get off making me cry.
I'm both sorry and not.
The text at the end destroyed me. I'm sitting on the couch going, "Oh my god!"
Yeah, she was.
And he's over there going, "Don't tell me."
Yeah, she finished it right before I did. I think the day before I did. Yeah.
It was upsetting.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so upsetting.
But
I'm glad that it made you cry because it should have, right?
Yeah.
Like the way that it's set up, and this is spoiler territory, so we can come out and say it. she ends up finding her best friend dead. And it's at, by the way, an offbeat. So this is where you can mess, when you know story beats and you know story structure, you can mess with it to mess with the audience expectations.
Yeah.
So long as you have a point. So you're not expecting it. When she goes into that barn, you are not expecting. The last thing in the world you're expecting is
Yeah.
for her to find her best friend dead.
Mm-hmm. It's right on the heels of a really, really wonderful moment for Amy and Daniel.
Yeah, they have kind of a weird bonding experience.
Yeah, I still don't know how I feel about the relationship. I think that's kind of the idea, though.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's like, I don't know about this. That's good. It's right where you should be. Right.
Yeah, them walking in on that scene, it was gut wrenching.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was so when I said that like I had to figure out where Kayla fit in. So I'm sitting there re-outlining stuff and going through, and I was like, oh my God. I cried for 3 days.
Yeah.
When I realized what I had to do. And I was like, oh no, Amy. Like I felt so bad for her because she's become not quite a real person, but important to me. Like I played her for a long time and whatever. And I'm like, I'm going to do this to you. And I know what else I have in store for her in the time to come. And I'm just not very nice. But I'm like, hey, I also give her some good stuff too. Right. And that's important, I think, in any story, but especially horror. Like I have a quote that I have saved on my computer that I love, and it says, first give them beauty and then give them darkness. And that's the compass that I write by. So like if you can set up, like that's why it starts going, it's more of this coming of age, almost YA feel to it in the beginning, right? Sort of walking along and they're best friends and they're doing their fiddly thing. And oh, that mother's such a snot, and you're just along. Well, okay, this is kind of weird, but it's still kind of innocent. And then it starts to build a slow sort of maybe this isn't so innocent, And Amy even says she's like, or Kayla says at one point, I think, I'm afraid we're over our heads. We're in over our heads, right? So, yeah, that moment totally threw me off. I honestly didn't believe it at first. I thought she was losing her mind and seeing things or something. Yeah, and
yeah,
I had another reader who, actually my alpha reader, who I was sending chapters. I'd write a chapter and send it to her, and then work on the next chapter. So for a little while, she only had the ending. She didn't have the next chapter where she screams Kayla's name. Right? So it was just her looking at, and I hadn't added the detail about the paint, her nails being purple. I hadn't added that. I added that in specifically to help the reader because she looked at it and thought it was Leilani, which is fair enough. I did that kind of on purpose to be a little ambiguous. But then I added the purple nail polish that is referenced earlier. And I was like, put that in there. And then if they still don't get it, then she's screaming her name in the next opening scene. So that was kind of gut wrenching to write too, just to be fair. I cried. I didn't do it lightly. I don't kill characters off lightly, but then you see at the end, like I tried to give it closure while also leaving the door open that there's something else. Like you said, Scott, you said there's something else here. You picked up on that. I don't beat you over the head with it.
Right.
But like when she's out at that barn afterwards and kind of recovering with Daniel and like trying to make sense of all this craziness. And she feels something at the end there briefly.
Right.
And then she goes.
Like,
that was my little, hey reader, there's 9 books.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I could easily tell that there was something under the surface that we weren't reading and something bigger going on, because in my opinion, it's kind of a small story that felt like it's going somewhere epic.
Yeah.
and I like that a lot. I like reading that. You know, again though, like I said earlier, it's almost like an origin story. Like, have you read a lot of comics and graphic novels and stuff like that?
Yes.
Okay.
I have. And one of my favorite characters is Harley Quinn and the Joker. Both of
Love
them.
Harley Quinn.
Harley Quinn
I
and
have
the
so
Joker.
many Harley Quinn like trade paperbacks.
Yeah, so I think
hardcovers.
if you like Harley Quinn and the Joker,
Yeah,
you'll probably like this.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I would say. I'm in that vein.
gotcha.
I mean, you can
And
even see red and black. You know.
Yeah, we really do enjoy those characters a lot. So,
That reference to the Joker kind of makes me really worry about Daniel.
Well, you see where he goes in Red String. Like he's
yeah,
I mean, savage. That's why I was kind of confused about whether or not that actually was Daniel and Amy, because I was thinking he was not this horrific.
yeah, but one of the things that makes me wonder too is, you know, now that you bring that up, and something I thought about earlier, is he doing this more for Daniel, or is he doing more of it for Amy? We're not sure. We're not sure at this point, because the Joker was really good to Harley Quinn for a little while.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we'll see.
They're into a very, very terminally codependent relationship.
Well, yeah, and that actually brings up something. Have you guys ever seen the movie Benny and June?
Yes, I have.
I don't think I have.
It's Johnny Depp and
No, I haven't.
okay.
I've seen the
I've seen
commercials
it.
for it.
Madeline Stowe, is it? I don't know. I can't remember the other person who's in it, but
I don't have my. Can you look it up?
I took a little bit of influence from that for their relationship too. Like these two crazy people who
Yeah.
sort of found each other. So that'll be a little bit more apparent as time goes on too. It's definitely a complex relationship, and one that it's one of the reasons that I decided to write this story, because I was like, I haven't seen anything like this out
It's
there.
Mary Stewart Masterson.
Mary Stewart.
Yeah, Mary Stewart Masterson. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Hello, Tom.
Yeah. Most definitely, it is different. That is one of the things I will say about it. It is completely unique. Like, I've not read anything like this before. I've read YA, you know, somewhat. It's not something I normally grab. I know this book is, like you said, it starts out as kind of a YA book and then turns into something else completely.
Mm-hmm.
It has, now, one of the things I love about it so much, and I mentioned this earlier, it has so many different elements from different things. It has horror elements. It does have a few action elements. It has YA elements. It has romance elements. It has a lot of different elements and doesn't feel disjointed. That's hard to do.
Mm.
That's
Thank
extremely
It has
hard to
really
do.
good flow to it.
It's because you can't classify it as a YA novel. You can't classify it as a romance novel. I think you can call it horror, closer to horror than anything else, probably. You can't classify it as an action novel. So it's hard to classify, but in being that, it's strong enough. It's so strong that I think most people would enjoy it.
Yeah, I had a few beta readers who were in my writing group, and when they read it, they were like, "We don't normally read horror,
Yeah,
but this is amazing." Right?
Yeah.
That's the feedback that I got, that I don't normally read it, but I couldn't put this down. And
Yeah.
so, and I will say, like, you never know, because they know me, they like me, like, how much is the Nikki influence versus, like, so getting to get you guys' perspective, although we've gotten to know each other a little bit over the last couple of weeks, but, you know, just hearing that take on it, that other people get it, that it came together, that it flows like how I hoped it would, you know, that I did put love into every word, every page to try to make it, you know.
Well,
pop.
the dialogue, now I will say about the first 10 pages of the book, the dialogue was so crisp and so real sounding that it was almost off-putting to me. But then after about 10 or 12 pages, I was like, wow, this makes total sense to these characters. This and
yeah, I
and,
just sort of
then
throw you in over her shoulder. That's how I
yeah,
felt
Yeah.
it. I was like, I'm coming down into Maine, into this barn, over Amy's shoulder as she jumps down into it. And now
yes,
what's happening in the scene, you know?
yep. But it's I mean I could easily see this thing being selling a whole lot more copies for you because it's very good.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and trying to classify it, like you said, you put it in cosmic horror this month. And I was like, because again, when you read the blurb on the back, it starts off with H.P. Lovecraft was wrong. Fear
Yeah,
isn't the strongest emotion. Fear only causes three reactions: fight, flight, or freeze. Love, on the other hand, love is limitless and far more deadly.
yeah,
So it's a horror story about love.
yeah. Well, that's exactly what it is, I would say.
Yeah, yeah.
But
But
I
I
would think
also
I
go
would
ahead.
think cosmic horror would be what it would fit in the best with what we've got because it's not going to fit into creatures. It's not,
Well, you're dealing with a very mental headspace sort of story.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's why I put it in psychological horror
Mhm.
yeah,
because it does get very, is this real? Isn't it? She's dealing with a lot of pressure in her
Mhm.
head. Just, so it
Which is
is.
Yeah,
It,
it's where that's where a lot of cosmic horror begins, is in the psychological aspect of things. So it makes perfect sense.
mhm.
yeah,
Yep. And then, like, you can kind of also understand why she would give so much control over to Daniel at the end, like she
hmm,
does,
Mhm.
because she has so much on her plate, right?
Yeah,
And that, go
she's
ahead.
got the world on her shoulders. She really does. She has so much weighing on her. He gives her a very small hint of normalcy.
Yes. And she grabbed onto that like a life preserver, right?
yeah,
And
Glommed on, yeah.
so he may be a very dark shade of gray at moments, although I would argue he's a lot of fun to write.
I bet he is.
yeah, I'm sure.
Some of the stuff he thinks that he says and he doesn't say, you know, is a lot of fun. But he's a very
Yeah,
dark shade of gray. And where Amy's story is going to get so black that he'll be light in comparison at
Oh
parts.
lordy.
So my challenge is to keep it light whenever possible. So
yeah,
even though I deal with some heavy, dark stuff, whenever humanly possible, when it doesn't mess with the flow, when it doesn't mess with the characters, I put humor in there because you
yeah.
have to, otherwise you're just drowning. And I didn't want that. I want there to be
Right.
funny, laughing, ridiculous times,
I haven't.
Yeah. Well, we have been on for about over 80 minutes, so that makes
Okay.
me. This has been a great one, and I mean, if you want to keep going, we'll keep going. If you need to go, we can go. It is up, you know,
If you guys
whatever
have
you
more
would like to do.
questions, I'm good to go for a little bit longer. Or if there's any more questions in the chats, or just you had things you wanted to discuss, that's fine.
Okay.
We knocked my phone off.
Yeah, we knocked Becky's or Link knocked Becky's phone off. So Becky's gonna look at our questions real quick, and
Thank you, Sean. Thank you very much.
yeah, Sean.
So no, I don't really have
Yeah,
it
well, I've got
here.
one.
Yeah.
Now the spiral in this universe, is this something you've been thinking about for like years?
Yeah. So the game that we were originally in was like some 11 years ago. And we played it for a couple of years. And I always so what you do for role playing games is generally you'll write up a backstory, and usually it's like a page or two. It doesn't have to be
Right.
like a whole lot, but I've always sort of been writing in that capacity. Be like, okay, here's my character's backstory, and here's how I justify this merit and this flaw, and blah blah blah. And when I went and sat down to write Amy's, something clicked. Like again, I felt her over my shoulder at that point, and her voice just I'd written in the voices of my characters before, but there was something there. So and it just sort of flowed out. And when I turned it into my game group, they were like, there's something here. Like it got a little notice in that way. I was like, interesting. And so the church scene,
Yeah.
I actually wrote a little mini one in her backstory originally, like that version, just to kind of showcase the kind of hoodlums that they are. Like that's why I love that scene. It's fun.
Yeah.
Nobody really gets hurt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it establishes right away what their relationship is like.
And we learned very quickly that Daniel needs staying power.
He needs to, oh yes, you caught that.
Poor guy.
Beautiful. Well, one thing that always gets me about these sort of sex scenes is it's always so long, and oh, it just goes on, and I'm
Yeah.
like, he's 18.
Yeah.
It ain't going on and on and on, right? And
Yeah.
actually, one of the things that I kind of was like, oh, about was I had up in my mind in the game and everything, every time it ever came up, like Amy never got to get off. Like it was
Yeah.
just too quick. You know, and how many women can relate to this, okay? Especially when you're in younger relationships, it's a thing. So it was important to me when I was writing it to put that in there to give it a more realistic feel. So it's not just this isn't just sex scenes for the sake of sex scenes. By the way, too, I should address that. The sex in this, if it's in there in detail, there is something there. There's a
Right.
reason for it. You need to pay attention. It's not just me going off on a tangent because
Mhm.
I fade to
Mhm.
black when I need to fade to black, which I do a
Right.
few times, right? So their relationship is hot and heavy, and I want to show that, but I don't need to go into detail every time. So, but I do strategically go into detail, and it's to show mindset. It's to show how their relationship is, right?
Right.
So, I forget what my overarching point was. I got distracted. Got hot and bothered. But,
I can't remember what we were talking about. Oh,
yeah,
we're talking about building the universe. Was it something you had in your head for a long time?
oh yeah. So like I had written that scene for that little like backstory, and just to kind of tease my GM at the time too. It was like, ha, you know, I wrote a love scene, you know, because you do that, you go back and forth and tease each other.
Yeah.
um, and I was like, no, you have to read this, ha, you know. But then it was like, no, there's something here, like, and so that is when you say like origin story, yes,
Yeah.
this is her origin story. So what a thing to drop in your GM's inbox. Here's my character, right?
Here's
so
her destroying her father's pool table.
Yeah, the
Oh.
pool table. That one I fought for that scene. I did, because they kept like going weird places, and I was like, I need to get you back here. Like, I want that pool table scene because it's been in my head for a long time, and I love it. And it
Cool.
just is so thematically appropriate, and you know, a very awful hoodlummy thing that she can do to her dad. Because originally, her dad was supposed to get into a fight with her at the end over that pool table. Right, I touch on it a little bit. Like she's like, he's gonna freaking kill me. And
Is it cherry juice? Yes, cherry juice.
yes, it's oddly like you're allowed a little bit of leeway with comic relief type stuff. Like after everything she'd been through, I was like, I'm keeping the cherry juice in. You know, because maraschino cherries stain. Like this is a thing. So it's totally believable that he would think it, that he would want to believe it. But yeah, I fought for that scene, and they so her dad and her were supposed to get into a fight at the end, and then during that fight, you know, she drains him and all of that stuff happens. But then we get to the end, and because Kayla had been kept in the story, what ended up happening is her dad he looked at me too, and he's a tertiary character, but I still
Yeah.
listen to him. It's like, he's kind of an absent father, but he's trying. He's bad
Yeah.
at it, but he's still trying. And he sees that what his absence has done to his wife and his daughter, and that things are falling apart. And so he's trying. And so rather than get mad at her, he realizes that could have been her, and he hasn't been around enough. And if it had been, what would, so it gives him this epiphany. And I'm like, that's okay. You're going. And in about 2 seconds. Great. No, and it worked better too for like bringing and lightening the mood before I put her through craziness.
Right.
And it was probably a much stronger scene that it happened during something really, really tender happening between her and her father.
I think so
instead of
too.
a fight like earlier.
So that's another case where just listening to the characters, it's going to come out better. I have yet to come across something where that doesn't at least appear to be the case. Obviously, I went with it, so I thought it was better. But except the pool table, I stuck to my guns on that, and they did. Go ahead.
You have a very strong way with words. One thing that I really noticed, and it was I mentioned it earlier though. I want to talk about it during the spoiler section. Directly after Kayla dies, there's a very, very, by design, choppy paragraph filled chapter where it's talking, where it said, "My mother says I need to be with family, so I went somewhere else." And it's full of these isolated little paragraphs. It's absolutely beautiful. It made me cry worse.
Yeah. Like I put into that situation, I thought that exact same thing, that I wanted to, I needed to bring you out of that realistically. Like, it couldn't just be, then the next day we're going on and off to our adventures after I've just been elbow deep in my best friend. And what I did to her, because the healing was always going to be a thing that happened. That's been there from the beginning. And the scene with Daniel getting into a fight has been there since the very first origin story that I did. It's very different looking now, but when I figured out that I was going to kill Kayla, I'm like, all right, when is it coming? Okay. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So I'm going to give her the ability to heal, and then she's going to go and not be able to heal her best friend. And my heart broke.
Yeah.
I was like, that's so cruel. Type.
That's so cruel. I love it.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to find the chapter that you're talking about so people can see what it looks like. Yeah. So it's chapter 44.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just gets very choppy like that. Ma said, or no, what was it? Mother said you should be with family. I went home with Ma, who's the other mother,
Yeah.
And it's her state of mind that she doesn't even know what's happening. It's this fugue state. So, and another thing that I played around with a lot was jumping around when she's out of her mind. And I have the text jump around the page.
Yeah.
So if I could have formatted it, I would have done a page where all the words just fall. Like there's that House of Leaves book. Are you familiar with it?
I've read House of Leaves. What you did was so much better.
I haven't actually gotten to read it yet, but it's hit my radar for having some very good
Becky
formatting.
despises that book. She hates that book.
I hate that movie with a passion.
That book.
Or that movie, that book. I hate that book with a passion they could write stories about.
Well, yeah, because it's told in journalistic style, right?
It's like a found footage movie fit into a peer-reviewed journal, fit into a story told by a crazy person.
Well, and some of the text at one point spirals on the page.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing that, and I was like, "What is this?" And then I was like, "Oh, That's awesome. I would totally have done that.
Yeah.
But I couldn't figure out how to get it to format. There are ways, I'm sure. Like if I
Yeah,
would have
that's
really dived in, but I was like, I bought Vellum as a software to make it simple, so I didn't have to deal with it. And I was like, sorry, I'll do what I can.
it was very effective what you did with it. Very, very effective. Yeah, I hear what you're talking about with the words spiraling around the page. That section of that book was the noteworthy part.
Yeah, okay. Well, and just like how all the words jumbled at the bottom of the page.
Mhm.
You know, I felt like because I was trying to get you into Amy's head as she's losing her mind while
Yeah.
keeping you focused on what's actually happening. That was a challenge. It was a lot of fun. It was a big challenge, and being able to just jumble the words like that would have been so fun. You know,
It would have made absolute sense as well to the story.
like, well, I fell apart. You know? And who comes to put her together? Like, so there's that scene where she's, you know, there. Do you know the saying about Chekhov's gun? Are you familiar with Chekhov's gun?
I don't think so.
Mm-mm.
So Chekhov's gun is a thing in writing where if you introduce a gun, they say that you have to use it at some point. So if like the audience sees a gun in somebody's holster and it's like focused on anyway, that gun has to come back and be fired at some point.
Perfect sense. Yeah.
Sure.
And so I'm learning all this stuff about writing, you know, and all these, you know, reader expectations. And I come across this one and I'm like, oh, you mean like Kayla's gun that you just was cleaning? So I have this gun sitting there and I'm like, oh, well, what am I going to do with this gun now? Because I totally get that as a reader, you know. Now in
Mhm.
horror, you are allowed some red herrings, which is also why I love the genre. You are allowed some threads that don't go anywhere, things
Yeah.
that just add to the atmosphere, you know, and make you wonder and question and whatever. But in this case, I was like, well, let's just keep it in mind. What could happen with this gun? And so what ends up happening is you know, it's Kayla's mother's gun that she's not supposed to have. She's running around with. And her mother sees her waving the gun at Daniel, which by the way is a very irresponsible thing to do, right? She's like, you better treat her good, basically, you know. And the mother's like, that better not be my gun, right? And Amy saves her butt, switches out her cigarettes for it, and hides it in the glove box. And I was like, okay, that happened. Now the gun is in the glove box of Daniel Chevelle.
Right.
And I didn't plan that. I was just writing the scene and it was ending and wrapping up. And this is what Kayla said, and this is what she did. She happened to have the gun. She pulled it out on Daniel, was being an asshole. You know? And so then it's sitting there and I'm remembering it. And I'm remembering Chekhov's gun. I'm like, I literally have a gun. Kayla's gun is in that glove box. So then the Chevelle comes pulling up. And I was like, that gun is in the glove box. So it doesn't pay off in she uses it to kill somebody. It doesn't even fire. But if it could have, right? She puts it to her, in her inability to handle anything that just happened. She puts it to her chin and clicks.
Right.
And then 1 second later, Daniel takes it from her. So he's standing right there and he takes it from her and he's like, not in the Chevelle.
Yeah.
So like, if you don't know Daniel's not all there by then, there's no
Right.
like, oh, Amy, honey, what's going on? You know, which you would get with Kayla, which you did in an earlier scene.
Yeah.
Like, I'm here for you. It's okay. You know, not in the Chevelle. And he does take the gun away. And then he's like, not at all. Like, you're not killing yourself. Like, almost as an afterthought. No,
Right.
not in my car. And not at all. So I had fun.
So mad.
I had fun with that, you know.
I'll bet.
So, yeah,
Yeah, I can see Daniel as being a great character to write.
he
Yeah.
is. He has a very irreverent way of looking at the world. There are reasons behind everything that he says and does,
Right.
right? And I'm very aware of that. And, hopefully you found it amusing. Sometimes there's that beautiful bastard character that you just love to hate.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Becky loves those. She reads a lot of. Well, she used to read a lot of historical romance, and they have a lot of those beautiful bastard
They're always
characters.
beautiful bastards.
They're
I don't
always
know why.
We didn't get to talk too much about the mother. Like we did a little bit earlier. I don't know if
Right.
you wanted to go into her at all.
Yes, we when we were talking when we were talking about the mother character, we were talking about how much she resembled Mrs. Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, because
Yeah.
Mrs. Bennet she's mercenary with her children. Her entire focus is set on those children's financial future. And
Financial future, or just the way things look.
Yeah,
on
and
the
how
outside.
things look, how people see them, and wow, it seems to me Mother is just a much more unstable version of Mrs. Bennet.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and she calls her mother. She never calls her mom.
Yeah.
She is mother. Her dad calls her mom a few times. Somebody else might call her mom.
Yeah.
But Amy never calls her anything other than mother. And that's
You get a
was
great
deliberate.
juxtaposition there, because you also have the Ma character.
Yeah, and then I have
Um,
Ma, who's
To
like
see how a
short,
real mother
puffy.
acts.
Yeah, she definitely was. And it just happened, like when I wrote her, I was like, okay, she's a nurse. And then Amy ends up in the hospital. And I was like, well, that worked out. Because she was just sort of a background character, the mother that was sort of the Ma who's the anti-mother, I
Right.
guess. That brings up another point too that I don't know if you caught or if people catch, but I had fun with it. Daniel is called different things by just about everyone in his life. So
Yeah, I know Trevor calls him Dano.
Dano, you get Dan. I think Danny Boy comes up.
Yeah.
Danny. There's a couple different versions of it depending on who, whether it's his family or his friends or Amy and Kayla. So that was my little subtle something's a little off here.
Yeah.
So that he's very unreliable.
Mm-hmm. And that he doesn't bring her home for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even
when he does, it's like, don't leave this room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because his mother's wonderful.
Well, you should have known she would too.
Well, he doesn't get mad when he comes back and finds out she did.
Yeah, he doesn't.
Right?
Yeah.
He doesn't.
So.
He just rolls on to the next thing. Okay, well that's the thing that happened.
Yeah, we had a discussion on whether or not Daniel is a sociopath.
Mm-hmm.
But so we'll let you know when we decide.
But we've almost decided against it, in that
he truly does seem to care.
He truly does seem to care about her. I mean, there are times that a sociopath though can find feelings for one person, so we will just have to see where it goes.
Yeah. And that is by design. You're right, Becky. I have Kayla and Amy have that discussion for a reason, right? Is this a thing or not? And I don't want to spoon feed the reader. So
Right.
I will present the story and you can decide what you think of him and if he's a good thing or a bad thing. And, there are bad sections. There are bad parts of him. He's a bad influence in some ways, but so is Amy, right?
Yeah.
And he does some kind of really twisted things at the end there, but he also covers her butt at the hospital. It's complex. People are not so black and white.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, he's truly what she needs.
Hmm.
Because he does ground her.
Yeah, he grounds her.
He really does ground her.
Yeah.
Which is really good because she's got this really dangerous power.
Well, and she lost the one person who did help to ground her.
Hmm.
You know, she actually lost that grounding aspect of it early in the book.
Yep. She lost the ability to just be around Kayla, right?
Yeah,
in the beginning, because she was so bright.
Yeah.
So like I started to distance them, and I needed them to be when Kayla stayed in the story. I was like, okay, but I need this to happen. I need Amy to be at a really low point when Daniel comes in.
Right.
That needs to happen for story reasons.
Yeah, she needs to be essentially alone.
Yeah, and so I was like, I need to separate them, and then the brightness thing started happening, and I was like, that makes perfect sense. Like she doesn't want to not be around her, but she can't. And then Daniel, it's bittersweet, right? It's called bittersweet empathy for a reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's another example of things zigging when they could zag, I guess.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to go ahead and cut this off. We're almost at 2 hours.
Oh my goodness. You guys are so easy to talk to.
Oh, you are too. I mean, we love this kind of interview where the author actually wants to talk about their book. You know, because you will see interviews with people who are just, I don't know, they don't seem to be there to talk, and I don't understand that. So this has been
weird.
This has been great. Yeah.
Well,
Really
yeah,
cool.
and there is kind of a thing where it's hard to know what's spoilery and what isn't. And that's true just in like writing the blurb, right? Like I had such a hard time because I was like, I almost don't want a blurb. I just want you to read it and experience it as you go, and you have no idea what's going to happen, because that's how role-playing games are. So to get back, I guess, to that question and answer it from a different way is, you know, there's this sort of innocence that happens in a role-playing setting that you don't get as much in a book, because I created Amy, and then whatever happened in the game that night. You know, there was no preconceived notions of where things were going to go.
Yeah.
And so the books that follow, books 2 and 3, kind of are loosely based on the game that we played. But again, it has been very changed. There's giant aspects that have been changed, but it's got inspiration from that, shall we say. And then after that, I just kind of kept going with it. So then it becomes kind of a little based on some of the game, and then who knows? I know a little bit to set you at ease. I do have the overall arc, and it could possibly even go beyond 9 books, but I just was like, 9 is a good number.
Right. Right. Okay.
All right.
So this is our recommendation for the book. We will have a link in the notes, in the comment. Well, not in the comments, but in the notes down below. Yeah, a description. You can get it. You can get the ebook. You can get the paperback, whichever you prefer. And comes highly recommended. Not just by us either. If you look at the Goodreads and the Amazon reviews as well, they're raves.
Yeah,
they are great.
Great feedback.
Yeah. So
Yes, I'm happy with the reception that it's getting, and I hope people have fun with it too. You know, it's horror, but it takes you on a ride.
Oh, it does, and I can't imagine anybody reading it and not enjoying it. You know, not actually just falling in love with some of the characters, whether you want to or not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they, like you said, they're great. So you
Daniel
may not.
has a fan club. Daniel has a fan club.
I love Daniel.
Yeah.
He's a great character.
I do too.
Yeah.
He's about crazy as snake suspenders, but he's awesome.
Yeah.
So I get it. It's a talent to be able to write a character that is so morally gray, and everybody still go, I love him.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Thank you so much for joining us. This
Yeah.
is Nikki DeKeuster. She's the author of The Spiral.
Bittersweet Empathy.
The
Or
Spiral.
Bittersweet Empathy
Name of the book
series.
is the name of
Yeah.
the book is The Spiral, and it's the
Yeah.
Bittersweet Empathy series.
Okay.
I knew
Look
that,
at you all
Shelley.
clattering on like an old married couple.
Yeah, we do that a lot.
We are an old married couple.
That is the charm of this channel. Like I was like, oh, I, that's why I was like, I looked at one of your videos before contacting you. I'm like, okay, who are these people? And I was like, oh my god, yeah, that would be great.
Cool. Yeah, we appreciate it. We do love doing these videos and lives and all this. This is something we really enjoy. We love the contact with everybody. And yeah, hopefully, some of you will go out there and pick this book up and we'll read it for the month. I mean, it is worth it. It is much. Yeah.
It's over the 250 page limit, but I don't care.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, but if you do want to stay within the 250 page limit, then read Red String. It actually has the first few chapters of the Spiral
true.
in the back.
Yeah, because it's the reader magnet for one, and because I wanted a physical copy, and I had to put more into it
Yeah.
to be able to print it. Basically, is what it came down to. So I was like, why don't I just put the first couple chapters in?
Yeah,
Why not?
yeah, it's great. And we would love to, whether it's when you write something else and bring something else out, or if you just want to come on sometime, we'd love to have you back. So
That's great. Can I give one more plug? I forgot
yes, please.
from my friend who writes urban fantasy.
I've seen those, and I want to read them. I think they're actually on my TBR.
So these are the first two. She just released on the 29th. The third one, Obsidian Oath, I don't have a physical copy yet, but she has helped me out immensely with everything to do with writing. And these are fast-paced, slow burn romance, urban fantasy.
Well, that sounds like something we would enjoy.
Books.
Yeah, I have seen those. I think I've seen them on Facebook.
Who is the author?
What was the author's name again?
Erin Embley.
Erin Embley. So Becky's going to look her up and see if it's on her TBR already. It probably is.
And I just got done doing a beta read / alpha read on her Obsidian Oath, the third one, and it's the best one yet. Like,
really? Okay.
Super, because for me, like, it takes me a bit to get into a series usually, and this is I got into these right away, but there's something that happens in that third bookmark for me. Like you just really the world pops in a way. Like you really get to know the characters and they feel like old friends coming back.
Yeah.
Is what I would say. So that's actually why I don't mind long books at all. It's the same thing. So like when you're reading a giant, doorstopper novel, you're in it and you're there with the characters for a long time. So it gets that experience by that third book. And I don't know, it's just a lot of fun. It's silly. It's light. It has dark elements to it. But anyway, if you like urban fantasy, and that's one of my other favorite genres, give it a go.
I love urban fantasy.
Yeah. She and her mom have been reading urban fantasy for a long, long time.
Yeah, it started with Harry Dresden.
Yeah, this is like the early days of
He is just I love him. Like he's another one where he's a gamer too. Like he role plays.
And does he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Jim Butcher does. And he understands that Harry can't always win. And sometimes it's gonna hurt. Sometimes it's really gonna hurt. Like Harry goes through some, but he'll snipe off his one-liner, but he knows when to hold it back, right? It's not just going up and slapping the king, right? Without consequences. He can throw a fireball at the king.
Right.
But his house is going to be burned down when he gets back to it, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so like there's consequences and Harry's still alive, but does he does he sometimes wish he wasn't? I don't know. We have to talk to him. If that series is like 17 in, and
Yeah.
Battlegrounds, the latest one,
Mhm.
I was bawling. Oh my god, and it's not for the reason that you might think if you've read it. It's not for the reason that you might think. There's something big that happens there to one of the characters that is cry-worthy, but I actually cried. I'm not sure this is much of a spoiler for it, but we're in spoiler central anyway. But basically, Chicago gets woken up to the fact that there's supernatural things and they're in the middle of a war and it's just the people, just you, me, average folk, suddenly are just in the thick of it and Harry can't protect them anymore. And I cried just for regular people walking down the street. I'm tearing up right now because and I know Chicago. I live in Wisconsin. I've been there many a time,
Yeah.
so like some of the landmarks that he talks about, I'm like, that's where that happened, and I can visualize the people walking there, so like he does such a great job of making you care
Yeah.
deeply about these characters. Get past the first one, which I didn't like. I almost didn't finish it and go into the series. But because the first one is formulaic, right?
Mhm.
It's too formulaic for me. It's adequate as a story, but if you can get past that first one, you're gold. Like that series can consume you for a while. And then you can reread it. You can listen to it on audio. James Marsters from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Spike
Yeah,
from Buffy.
she loves the audiobooks of that series, and I don't like that
He
narrator.
doesn't like James Marsters
Well,
as
how can you not like James
I love him.
Marsters?
I thought he did a great job. He sounds the way Harry sounds when I read the books to myself.
Now, I will say the first one in that, the first book, the narration is a little off. So if
It's
you only,
understated. It's very, very under.
it's underproduced, maybe. I'm not sure, but there's pops and there's smacks in that version that aren't in the rest of them. So if that's something that drove you nuts,
It may have. It's been a long time. It's been probably 8 years since I listened to it, at least. So I don't really remember.
Mhm.
But yeah.
so
But
yeah,
it's a series I'll pick up again. I've read the first 4, I think.
okay, yeah,
Yeah.
you're into it then. I'd
I
say
really
definitely by the
like
third.
the one about werewolves. I can't remember if that was 2.
That was 2.
Yeah,
Full
that
Moon.
I like 2 a lot.
It was
Like,
fun.
yeah.
Mhm.
He has fun with it, and you can tell that as a reader. You can tell when an author is having a good time, right?
Yes.
And that when it isn't just a plunked out slog fest or like they're looking at a template and plopping in character names,
Yeah.
right? You can tell when the
Yep.
characters feel real and thought through.
Yeah.
So that is
You
something
can-
that I tried, dear readers, darling readers, to give to you. So
Yeah.
you can tell me if you pick it up and you read it. Registering is free if you sign up for my newsletter at NikkiDeKeuster.com. So you can try me out and see if you like my writing style. I try to immerse you into Amy's chaos. So be forewarned.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
Poor Becky. Are you okay, Becky? It is horror.
I'm still a little shell shocked. I'll come
Here.
down after a while. I figured that I'll finally have a good idea of what I think of Daniel around book 8 or 9.
Yeah,
Yep.
we'll see.
We-
I got some plans.
But thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was great.
Yeah, we had a blast.
Thank you.
Yeah,
so
Thank you
much
for having me, and have fun with the rest of your horror stuff. I'll be watching all your videos. I'll be in the
Awesome.
comments.
Cool.
Most of
And
them
and
are
I
on-
also want to give a shout out to the Books of Horror Facebook page.
Oh yes, yes.
That is a wonderful community.
Yes, it is.
It's big. It's like over 20,000 now, I believe. 20,000
Mhm.
subscribers. So if you're not on that, I would highly recommend
Yeah,
you
they're
go.
so supportive of indie authors.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you don't get spammy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm not constantly on there being like, buy my book. But every
Yeah.
once in a while, like I posted about this, letting people
Yes.
know.
Yep. Before I posted about it, I told the mods, and the mods were like, "Yeah, go ahead." It took them a little while, but they were like, "Thank you for asking first, but
Oh,
go ahead."
yeah.
But they were like, "Thank you for asking," because it was my first time ever posting on Book
Okay.
Report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
makes
so
sense.
that would have been kind of strange to not. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
we really love it, and Nikki's on there pretty
Yeah.
frequently.
I plunk in
Commenting.
there. It's one of my haunts, one of my
Yep.
Facebook time suckers, and adding to my poor TBR pile. I'm currently reading Faces of Beth by Carver Pike. And you want to talk about some smooth writing.
Okay.
You gotta check this guy out.
I will.
I can't speak to the story aspect. This is my first one that I picked up, but his prose and his like characters so far very, very promising.
Okay.
And he just released this one. I decided to pick it up, and he's got a YouTube channel too where he does like first chapter freak show is one of them where he reads the first chapter of a horror book.
What is his name again?
Carver, like carving, Carver.
Yeah.
Pike,
Carver.
Pike, like
Carver.
head on a pike.
Okay. All right.
He also does Written and Read podcast with Aaron Beauregard, Daniel Volpe, and Roland Bailey Jr. I think his name is. I just started watching it, so
Cool. Yeah, those are some of the more popular authors over there on Books of Horror. I hear them talked about a lot.
Yeah, and they also do interviews and talk about books and stories. So you might want to, add them to your list too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A bunch
I'll
of
do that.
good supportive guys too. So
Okay. Cool.
all right, you guys have a good night. Thank you for
You
coming,
too.
everybody. And
Thank you.
yep, come visit me at NikkiDeKeuster.com, where I have a storyteller Facebook group you're welcome to join too.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. And you'll actually get a touch of your writing style over there as well, because you're I love reading your newsletter. It's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
just kind of I try to have fun and not
Mhm.
overthink it too much,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Well, we will talk to you very soon. And
All right.
and thank you. And I guess that's it. All right. You have a good night.
Have a
Good
good
night,
evening.
guys.
Thank you.